Shock travel. You need it, but how much and why?
Stay tuned and find out. So shock travel, it's extremely important. It's different than your overall suspension travel. A lot of things you need to consider, but we'll walk you through that and make sure that your car is riding and handling the way it should. Damien, what happens if you don't have the right amount of shock travel?
Well, if your shock travel is too short, or you're topping the shock out, bottoming the shock out, your ride quality is going to suffer because it's limiting the shock travel. Your performance is going to be poor, again, because your shock travel is now limiting and upsetting the suspension. And if you're topping out or bottoming out the shocks, you potentially damage the shocks. Best case, eventually it could cause internal problems and performance issues. Worst case, it physically breaks the shock. So we want to avoid that.
All right, so when you're thinking about shock travel, the things you want to be considerate of is what type of suspension system you're working with. What we have in front of me here, we have a solid axle rear end, a 10 bolt, but very common, like you find a 12 bolt, 4 9-inch. All your domestic muscle cars pretty much fall in that category. But your suspension travel, the way the axle moves is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio of how much your shock is going to move. So if your axle moves up 2 inches on a bump, your shock is also going to move 2 inches. And what you want to be thinking about is, through its range of motion, how do I not run out of shock travel? Because you never want the shock to be a limiter. Once it goes mechanically solid, that's a good case for which it's either going to result in a bad ride quality or you might break something. So typically what we recommend is at least 2.5 inches of travel, both on compression and then also on rebound as well. If you have more, great, but 2.5 is what we recommend for a solid axle. Now, independent suspension, it is different. And Damien, walk us through some of the considerations with us independent front suspension.
Sure. So with an independent suspension, we're working with a motion ratio or a lever ratio. And in a generic independent suspension, it's going to be about a 2-to-1 motion ratio. So for every 2 inches of wheel travel, the shock's only going to move about 1 inch. In a case like that, a 3-inch travel shock is generally the minimum amount of travel that we want to see there.
And that 3-inch shock, mind you, that's going to be 6 inches at the wheel. So that's going to give you plenty of ride quality and comfort and performance you're looking for out of the car. Now, common questions that we oftentimes get is, I'm building my suspension from scratch. I got a tube chassis set up, or maybe I'm modifying a muscle car and trying to fit coilovers or shocks to it. How much shock travel should I be thinking about when it comes to where I place my mounts and things of that nature? And really the answer for that is, again, if you think about some of the things that we talked about today on at least 2.5 inches of travel in either direction in the back. If you can get more, great. Or again, if you're looking at anywhere in excess of 3 inches of overall travel for the front, you should be in good shape. So put your mounts where they best fit the chassis. Put your mounts in an area that's easy to access the shock and take advantage of adjustable valving or whatever adjustment your shock might have on it, and you'll be just fine. Also be thinking about, again, you don't want that shock to be a limiter, so be thinking about your bump stops and different means for which you would prevent shock travel from exceeding what it's designed to do and causing damage to the shock and or bad ride quality. So for more information about the topic of shock travel and how it affects your car, make sure to check out QA1.net. Full line of shock absorbers there, lifetime warranty on these products, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks, guys.